Hi, I'm Jonathan Hayfitz, and welcome to Law on Film, a podcast that explores the rich connections between law and film. Law is critical to many films. Films, in turn, tell us a lot about the law. In each episode, we'll examine a film that's noteworthy from a legal perspective. What legal issues does the film explore? What does it get right about the law, and what does it get wrong? And what does the film teach us about the law and the larger social and cultural context in which it operates? Our film today is the 1992 comedy, My Cousin Vinny. The movie tells the story of two college students from New York, played by Ralph Maccio and Mitchell Whitfield, who are driving through the South when they are mistakenly arrested and charged with the murder of a store clerk in Alabama and face the death penalty. Ironically, the two had thought they were being pulled over initially by the police for mistakenly stealing a can of tuna fish. One of the defendants decides to call his cousin, that's Vinny, my cousin Vinny, to get them out of this predicament. It turns out, however, that Vinny is a personal injury lawyer from Brooklyn who is newly admitted to the bar, has virtually no experience, let alone criminal defense experience. But somehow Vinny, with the help of his savvy fiancé, Mona Lisa Vito, played by Marisa Tomei, manages to turn the tide with a brilliant courtroom performance and have the case dismissed. Vinny, in a subplot, himself also narrowly escapes, having lied to the judge about his credentials. The script is by Dale Launer, and it was directed by Jonathan Lynn, who studied law at Pembroke College, Cambridge. It stars Joe Pesci as Vincent Gambino and Marisa Tomei, who won a Best Supporting Actor award for her performance. Ralph Maccio and Mitchell Whitfield are the two defendants. Lane Smith plays the prosecutor, and Fred Gwynne is the Southern judge who Vinny spars with throughout the film. We're honored to have as our guest today to discuss the classic American comedy about the law and lawyers, Judge Jed S. Rakoff. Judge Rakoff has served since March 1996 as a U.S. District Judge for the Southern District of New York. He also frequently sits by designation on the Second and Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Judge Rakoff is an adjunct professor at both Columbia Law School and NYU Law School, and a lecturer of law at Berkeley Law School and the University of Virginia Law School. He's written over 200 published articles, 900 speeches, and 2,000 judicial opinions. He's the author of Why the Innocent Plead Guilty and the Guilty Go Free, and Other Paradoxes of Our Broken Legal System, and he has also co-authored 5 books. He's a regular contributor to the New York Review of Books as well. After law school, Judge Rakoff clerked for the late Honorable Abraham L. Friedman, U.S. Court of Appeals Third Circuit, and then was an associate at the Debevoise Law Firm. From 1973 to 1980, he served as an assistant United States attorney in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, the last 2 years serving as chief of business and securities fraud prosecutions. Thereafter, before going on the bench, he was a partner at 2 large law firms specializing in white-collar criminal defense and civil RICO. Judge Rakoff served on the National Commission on Forensic Science and is co-chair of the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Eyewitness Identification. He served on Swarthmore College's Board of Managers and on the governance board of the MacArthur Foundation's Project of Law and Neuroscience. He's assisted the U.S. government in training foreign judges in countries around the world. He's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and of the American Law Institute. He's also a judicial fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers and the American Board of Criminal Lawyers. He was a director of the New York Council of Defense Lawyers. Among his many awards was the Learned Hand Award from the Federal Bar Council, the Leon Silverman Award from the American College of Trial Lawyers, and the United Nations World Jurist Association Medal of Honor. Judge Rakoff is married to Dr. Ann Rakoff, a child development specialist. They have 3 daughters, 2 grandsons, and Judge Rakoff and his wife are also expert ballroom dancers. Judge Rakoff has officiated at over 81 weddings and is the author of numerous lyrics and humorous poems, several of which have been published. In 2014, Judge Rakoff was listed by Fortune magazine as one of the world's 50 greatest leaders. I should add to these list of incredible accomplishments, I was privileged to serve as Judge Rakoff's law clerk in 1999 to 2000. As I was married by a rabbi and not Judge Rakoff, I thought, what better way to square the circle than to have Judge Rakoff come on my podcast to discuss the great film, My Cousin Vinny. Welcome, Judge.
So, John, it's really a great privilege and pleasure to be here. And thank you for that overwrought introduction. I'm just glad My wife's not here because she would demand rebuttal time.
Fair enough. It's always nice to give an introduction. Someone said it's an introduction that only a mother would give, and I'm proud to do that. Well, it's great to have you discuss this very funny movie dealing with a very serious subject, capital punishment, but it is a great comedy. And the film has received wide praise from judges, lawyers, and legal scholars for its portrayal of American jury trials. Is the praise warranted, do you think?
I definitely think it is warranted. It's not only a hilarious movie, but one of the most legally accurate movies that I know in terms of trial procedures, evidentiary rulings, and the like. My understanding is the credit for that goes to the director, Jonathan Lynn, who, although a Brit, went to Cambridge University to receive law training. And I think that led him to insist that the trial scenes and the procedural scenes all be consistent with the actual rules of procedure and evidence. And I think that adds to the movie's effect because we're so used to these sort of phony movies where the defendant confesses on the stand under cross-examination from Perry Mason or the like. And that doesn't happen in real life. But everything that happens in My Cousin Vinny could have happened in real life with only a little exaggeration. And I think that greatly adds to its impact.
Yeah, and it's incredible, too, because one of the reasons that's given for why movies or television shows aren't so real to life in depicting courtroom experiences is that you would lose some of the dramatic effect, right? They need to take poetic license, creative license to make it more dramatic. But the film's courtroom sequences are dramatic and funny, even as they're true to life. So that's an important achievement and worth noting.
Yes, I mean, when you come right down to it, comedy is just reality slightly exaggerated. So, and that's what you get here.
In the film, Vincent LaGuardia Gambini, aka My Cousin Vinny, played by Joe Pesci, after something of an awkward start, which includes being held in contempt by the judge, played by Fred Gwynne, and spending several nights in jail, effectively cross-examines several prosecution witnesses and turns the case around for his two clients. So let me play a clip of one of these cross-examinations, which involves the great Southern delicacy of grits.
Mr. Gambini, your witness.
Mr. Tipton, when you viewed the defendants walking from their car into the sack of suds, what angle was your point of view?
They was kind of walking toward me when they entered the store.
And when they left, what angle was your point of view?
They was kind of walking away from me.
So would you say you got a better shot of them going in and not so much coming out?
You could say that.
I did say that. Would you say that?
Yeah.
Is it possible the two youths...
The two what? What was that word?
What word?
To what?
What?
Did you say utes?
Yeah, two youths.
What is a ute?
Oh, excuse me, Your Honor. Two youths. Is it possible the two defendants entered the store, picked 22 specific items off of the shelves, had the clerk take money, make change, then leave? Then two different men drive up in a similar... Don't shake your head, I'm not done yet. Wait till you hear the whole thing so you can understand this now. Two different men drive up in a similar looking car, go in, shoot the clerk, rob him, and then leave?
No. They didn't have enough time.
Well, how much time was they in the store?
5 minutes?
5 minutes? Are you sure? Did you look at your watch?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. You testified earlier that the boys went into the store and you had just begun to make breakfast. You were just ready to eat and you heard a gunshot. That's right, I'm sorry. So obviously it takes you 5 minutes to make breakfast.
That's right.
Right, so you knew that. Do you remember what you had?
Eggs and grits.
Eggs and grits. I like grits too. How do you cook your grits? You like them regular, creamy, or al dente?
Just regular, I guess.
Regular. Instant grits?
No self-respecting Southerner uses instant grits. I take pride in my grits.
So, Mr. Tipton, how could it take you 5 minutes to cook your grits when it takes the entire grit-eating world 20 minutes?
I don't know. I'm a fast cook, I guess.
I'm sorry, I was all the way over here. I couldn't hear you. Did you say you're a fast cook? That's it? Are we to believe that boiling water soaks into a grit faster in your kitchen than on any place on the face of the earth?
I don't know.
Well, perhaps the laws of physics cease to exist on your stove. Were these magic grits? I mean, did you buy them from the same guy who sold Jack his beanstalk beans?
Objection, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
Are you
Mr.
sure about
Tipton,
that 5
you can
minutes?
ignore the question.
Are you sure about that 5 minutes?
I don't know. I think you made your point.
Are you sure about that 5 minutes?
I may have been mistaken.
I got no more use for this guy.
So, what makes this cross-examination so effective?
So, just to put this in context, although this is partly a movie about the death penalty, it is very largely also a movie about eyewitness identification. The sad truth is that wrongful eyewitness misidentification is the single biggest cause of wrongful convictions in the United States. And that has been well documented. So this movie in some ways exposes some of the problems with eyewitness identification. But with respect to the witness here, the Grits witness, whose name I think is Sam Tipton in the character's name, he's a very confident, certain witness. And of course, one of the reasons eyewitness evidence is so strong is that the witnesses typically are just bystanders. They don't have a motive to lie. And when they come across with certainty, yes, I'll never forget that face kind of certainty, it can be very powerful. So the problem that Vinny faces is how are you going to deal with a witness like that? And what he focuses on is the tendency of witnesses like that to exaggerate. And he finally comes across an area of total exaggeration where the guy says that he cooked his grits in 5 minutes, and Vinny, who's just learned about grits a day earlier in the movie, knows that it takes 20 minutes to cook your grits before you can have them ready for eating. And he finally gets the witness to admit that he was mistaken about how long it took for him to get his grits cooked. And that's important because it was right after that he says he saw the two boys and saw them fleeing from the scene and so forth. And Vinny, I thought something very true to life, knows then that that's the place to stop his cross-examination. He's got the guy in a clear exaggeration that every member of the jury understands is totally an exaggeration. And now he doesn't go on and give the guy a chance to weasel out of it or to get on to other subjects. He sits down. I think he says in the movie, I have no more use for this guy. But it gives him the basis to argue to the jury that this guy is just, exaggerates everything, and therefore you can't believe his account of what he saw.
I think it's a wonderful description of what happens and the way he leads him on and sets him up, has him dig in. The witness says no self-respecting Southerner would cook instant grits, right? So he's locked in, and then he just flips the whole script. And at that point, as you said, he certainly has the audience going for him, but in the courtroom, he's got the jury as well as the members of the public who are watching.
Exactly.
There's another cross-examination that I think is worth playing. This one is of another eyewitness who had testified that she had seen the two defendants. And this is one of the eyewitnesses, a woman who wears glasses. And so this becomes kind of the subject of the cross-examination here. I'm going to play the clip. There's some visual, which won't show up on the audio clip. We have to see the movie of Vinny running a tape measure across the courtroom to sort of approximate the distance. But here's the clip of this other effective cross-examination.
Mrs. Riley, when you saw the defendants, were you wearing your glasses?
Yes, I was.
Over here, dear. Would you mind putting your glasses on for us, please? Whoa! How long you been wearing glasses?
Since I was 6.
Have they always been that thick? Oh, no, they got thicker over the years. So as your eyes have gotten more and more out of whack as you've gotten older, how many different levels of thickness have you gone through? Oh, I don't know. Over 60 years. Maybe 10 times. Maybe you're ready for a thicker set. Oh, no. I think they're okay. Maybe we should make sure. Let's check it out. Now, how far were the defendants from you when you saw them entering the sack of suds? About 100 feet. 100 feet. Would you hold this, please? Thank you. Sorry, excuse me. Sorry. Okay, this is 50 feet. That's half the distance. How many fingers am I holding up?
Let the record show that counsel is holding up 2 fingers.
Your Honor, please, huh?
Oh, sorry.
Now, Mrs. Riley, and only Mrs. Riley. How many fingers am I holding up now? 4. What do you think now, dear? Thinking of getting thicker glasses.
So, what is Vinny doing here, and is this also effective and true to life?
So this is not only true to life, but this is a situation that defense lawyers face that is much harder than the earlier witness we saw, because this witness is clearly a truthful lady. She's very likable. No jury is ever going to think that she is lying or even not trying to tell the truth as it is. And when you have a witness like that, you have to take a chance. Now, you know, if you're a lawyer and you go to a training program on cross-examination, the instructors will always say, be sure not to ask a question you don't know what the witness will say in answer to, because you could really get burnt. But the reality is that when you have a witness like this, you've got to take some chances, because normal cross-examination will not work with a witness who is so likable and so truthful. So he focuses on the fact that she has, heavy glasses, and he takes the chance, and he takes a tape measure and goes 50 feet away and then holds up 2 fingers. By the way, at that point, the great judge interrupts to say, let the record reflect that he's holding up 2 fingers, which, by the way, would happen in real life. I mean, the judge's job is to say, oh, something's going on, and we want the record to reflect what's really going on.
Right.
But in any event, after that gets corrected, he holds up his 2 fingers, and she says 4 fingers. And, of course, that completely destroys the effect of her eyewitness testimony. Now, notice the great chance he took. Supposing she had said, oh, I think it's 2 fingers, then he would have been sunk. She would have been reinforced in her testimony. So he had to take that chance. And again, I think that is real life. When you have a witness like that, you can't go by the book. You have to devise some approach that, if it works, will be devastating, and if it doesn't work, will be devastating in a different way.
Yeah, I'm reminded where it doesn't work, if I'm remembering correctly, from the O.J. Simpson trial, the moment with
the gloves. Yes, exactly. Yes, right. So there you go.
And he also, I think you alluded to, treats her differently in terms of just the way he interacts with her. She's an elderly or older woman, very nice, as you said, would have no motive for lying. She's not cocky like the other witnesses, and Vinny adjusts, right? He's much gentler with her. When he finishes, it's sort of ends on kind of a soft note, even though he's undercut her testimony. He doesn't say, I'm through with her.
Right. And that's very important too, because he's an out-of-towner. Another theme of this movie is someone from a very different community trying a case, in this case, in a small Alabama town. And he's got to always be aware that the jurors may not may not like him. And here he's ingratiating himself with the jury by being Mr. Nice Guy.
You've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of cross-examinations in your career versus an attorney, both the defense and prosecution side, and then as a judge. The cross-examinations in My Cousin Vinny remind you of any you've done or you've seen?
So one of the best cross-examinations I ever did, I knew was working because of the following. And the jury, which up to then had directed their attention mostly at the witnesses, started looking just at me because they had concluded that my questions were the truth. And regardless of what the witness said, he was clearly lying. And you see that a little bit in My Cousin Vinny as well. As the jury gets more comfortable with Vinny and with his success, they begin to look at him. And I think, again, that's highly realistic and something that many people are not aware of. When the jury starts looking at the questioner, what they are really saying is it's the questioner who is the source of truth. So anyway, that happened to me once. Not too often.
Well, it's hard to achieve, but that's a really interesting way to see it. I mean, that becomes the person with authority in the courtroom. So it must be a nice feeling when you feel like the jury's kind of waiting for you to, like, whatever you say next is going to be what they're going to focus on.
Exactly.
One of the most memorable moments in the film involves My Cousin Vinny's fiancé, Mona Lisa Vito, again played by Marisa Tomei, who provides what turns out to be critical expert testimony on automobiles, effectively demolishing the prosecution's evidence linking the two defendants to the murder. Mona Lisa Vito had accompanied Vinny to Alabama, sort of help him, so he tries to use her as an expert. I'm going to play this clip of the voir dire by the prosecutor of Mona Lisa Vito, where he's going to probe and see if he's going to challenge her as an expert witness. So first, some brief questioning by Vinny, and then the inquiry by the prosecutor.
Ms. Vito, you're supposed to be some kind of expert in automobiles, is that correct?
Will you please answer the counselor's question?
No, I hate him.
May I have permission to treat Ms. Vito as a hostile witness?
You think I'm hostile? Now wait till you see me tonight.
Do you two know each other?
Yeah, she's my fiancé.
Well, that would certainly explain the hostility.
Your Honor, I object to this witness. Improper foundation. I'm not aware of this person's qualifications. I'd like to voir dire this witness as to the extent of her expertise.
Granted. Mr. Trotter, you may proceed.
Oh, Ms. Vito, what's your current profession?
I'm an out-of-work hairdresser.
Out-of-work hairdresser. Now, in what way does that qualify you as an expert in automobiles?
It doesn't.
Well, in what way are you qualified?
Well, my father was a mechanic. His father was a mechanic. My mother's father was a mechanic. My 3 brothers are mechanics. 4 uncles on my father's side are mechanics.
Ms. Vito, your family's obviously qualified. But have you ever worked as a mechanic?
Yeah, in my father's garage, yeah.
As a mechanic? What'd you do in your father's garage?
Tune-ups, oil changes, brake relining, engine rebuilds, rebuilt some trannies, rear end.
Okay. But does being an ex-mechanic necessarily qualify you as being an expert on tire marks?
No. Thank you. Goodbye.
Sit down and stay there until you're told to leave.
Your Honor, Ms. Vito's expertise is in general automotive knowledge. It is in this area that her testimony will be applicable. Now, if Mr. Trotter wishes to voir dire the witness as to the extent of her expertise in this area, I'm sure he's going to be more than satisfied.
Okay.
Now, Ms. Vito, being an expert on general automotive knowledge, can you tell me what would the correct ignition timing be on a 1955 Bel Air Chevrolet with a 327 cubic inch engine and a 4-barrel carburetor?
It's a bullshit question.
Does that mean that you can't answer it?
It's a bullshit question. It's impossible to answer.
Impossible because you don't know the answer.
Nobody could answer that question.
Your Honor, I move to disqualify Ms. Vito as an expert witness.
Can you answer the question?
No, it is a trick question.
Why is it a trick question?
Watch this.
Because Chevy didn't make a 327 in 55. The 327 didn't come out till 62. And it wasn't offered in the Bel Air with a 4-barrel carb till 64. However, in 1964, the correct ignition timing would be 4 degrees before tap dead center.
Well, she's acceptable, Your Honor.
Another federal judge, a South Carolina district judge, Joseph Anderson, has said that the film's treatment of Mona Lisa's testimony predicted the Supreme Court's 1999 ruling in Kumho-Tyre versus Carmichael on the Daubert standard. In other words, Daubert's rationale applies to all expert testimony rather than just to expert testimony based on scientific theories or principles, as opposed to non-scientific testimony based on an expert's personal experience or skills. Do you agree, and what are your thoughts about this exchange in the film?
So first, there's some important matters of pronunciation we have to clarify here. One of the film's few mistakes is they have the government attorney asking to do a voir dire. That's the way we pronounce it up here in New York. But in Alabama, it would be voir dire. Also, Daubert, which you correctly pronounced, is frequently mispronounced as Daubert or even by some snobs as Daubert. But Mr. Daubert says his name is Daubert, so I'm very glad you got that correct. Daubert had not actually been decided when this movie was released in 1992. And for the benefit of those who are not familiar with it, Daubert increased the role of the judge in determining the admissibility of expert testimony. And originally it dealt with scientific testimony, and then it was expanded in Kumho-Tyre to all expert testimony. And I do think this exchange here in the film is very true to life, even in the pre-Daubert period, because the government's expert had testified about tire marks. And the government's objection here on voir dire was that the defense witness didn't know beans about tire marks. And so Vinny very quickly changes and says, oh no, I'm calling her as an expert on general automotive knowledge. And that was the key. That was a much broader and more easily satisfied area of expertise. And she had the qualifications through both her family and through her own independent work as a mechanic. And I really wish I could hire her for my car. But again, it was really impressive how, like a real voir dire in the pre-Daubert period, this exchange was, and it made for very good theater, so to speak.
And so the ruling was, you would say, correct, she would have been admitted as an expert in that field of general automotive knowledge.
Yes, after Daubert and after Kumho-Tyre, there probably would have been a little bit more questioning, about her methodology and stuff like that. But in the pre-Daubert area, this was exactly right. And the ruling was, in my view, exactly right as well.
They might have probed more on the partiality or impartiality by the fact that she's his fiancé, although as they're in the middle of a huge argument and she's being very resistant to being put on the stand by Vinny, he says he's going to treat her as a hostile witness. So maybe that.
Well, and the judge, who is fantastic, by the way, Fred Gwynne, who, by the way, previously played ghouls, and I thought that was good training for a judge. He says, do I detect some, personal hostility? And Vinny says, she's my fiancé. And the judge says, yes, that explains the hostility. So anyway, yes, the partiality, the personal relationship would have been an issue that the judge would have to encounter, but the very showing that she was not on his side allowed him to make the ruling he did.
Were there any other aspects of the film's depiction of the trial you found noteworthy?
This reflects my own bias as a judge. The one I thought ruling that might have been questioned was before the government witness is called, Vinny, who up to then has done no legal research worth talking about, does a little legal research, and he makes an objection before the government calls its FBI witness, saying this was, not one of their originally listed witnesses. We need at least an adjournment to research what he has to say about tires and all like that. And the judge says that's a well-reasoned, articulate, logical objection. Denied. And I think in real life, you could have gone either way. I'm not saying he was wrong. It was something of a surprise witness. On the other hand, you have a jury sitting there. And to say to the jury, okay, we're going to adjourn for 2 days so that counsel can deal with an unexpected issue is the way it would probably be put. That's a little bit unfair to the jury. And I think many, many judges, including the judge here, give their highest priority to making sure the jury remains focused and remains intent on their very heavy responsibility. So I think even there you could have justified the ruling. In addition, of course, it also reflected the judge's own bias against Vinny, which changes very much as the film goes on and he sees what a good lawyer Vinny is. But initially, he's very, very much opposed to Vinny.
He's turned around by the end, and meanwhile, he's investigating Vinny's credentials. Vinny had told him he had a lot of experience. He gave a false name, and then when the judge checked on it, he said, "Oh no, it was you mispronounced it, or it's pronounced this way."
Right.
So he's checking on it. So there's kind of a race before time, and Vinny has to win the case, have the case thrown out, probably not even go to the jury by like that afternoon because the judge is going to call and get an answer to who Vinny was. And in probably one of the less realistic, I would say, aspects of the film, his fiancé, Mona Lisa, Vinny's fiancé, Mona Lisa, cuts the judge off at the pass by making a well-placed phone call to, I think, the judge that had been a mentor to Vinny to confirm that Vinny...
Yeah, that would never have happened. The judge would not have lied to another judge, which is what happened here. That was artificial, but, the theme was to show that Mona Lisa really could be incredibly helpful to Vinny, who was always sort of saying, oh, you don't know what you're talking about when I don't need your help. And of course, she's the key helper in every aspect of the ultimate victory.
Yeah, I think there were some talks of a subsequent movie, and I don't recall what happened with that, but you would have to think that in any future practice of Vincent Gambini, Mona Lisa Vito would be playing a huge role, given how critical she was to keeping him on task.
Yes, and I want to state here publicly, even if my wife is listening, that I'm in love with Marisa Tomei. She was so fantastic. She was just unbelievably great in that role.
Yeah, and she won, an Oscar for, not a normal Oscar-winning role as a supporting actress, kind of a comic turn. So no, she was fantastic. Well, let's turn for a moment to the setting and the context. And you had alluded to this before in terms of where the events took place and the lawyers from outside. It's been reported that a then young Will Smith was initially considered for the role of Bill Gambini's or Ralph Macchio's friend, Stan Rothenstein, a role that was ultimately played by Mitchell Whitfield. I think it's safe to say it would have been a terrible idea to try to make a comedy out of a black suspect getting thrown into prison in the Deep South and almost executed for a crime he didn't commit. So instead, the film offers a more innocent version of regional and cultural conflict between two white, ethnic, Italian, and I think likely Jewish young men, and their very ethnic New York lawyer, Vinny Gambini, who are clashing with an unsophisticated, if somewhat genteel system of Southern justice in small-town Alabama. So how did this cultural clash appear to you, both when you first saw the film and then when you rewatched it before our podcast?
So again, I think very true to life. I wouldn't limit it to the South. While I'm a huge fan of our jury system, the fact of the matter is that individual jurors frequently reflect the values and prejudices of their local community. And that is true whether you're trying a case in New York or trying a case in Alabama or wherever. And it's a reality. I made a big mistake in the very first defense case I ever had as a criminal defense lawyer. I took on the representation of a defendant who'd been charged in a fraud case in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And in hindsight, I should have hired a local attorney, but I just come out of the U.S. Attorney's Office. I had won all but one of my cases. I thought I was hot stuff. And so I went down to try this case. And when it went to summation, the judge, after listening attentively to the government summation, when I got up to give my summation, very visibly turned his chair and spent the entire time pretending to work on some other matter because there was no point in listening to my summation. And this, of course, was very visible to the jury. So my client was convicted in 4 hours. And the only good note was the bailiff came out up to me and he said, you really did well. They usually only take 2 hours to convict. But anyway, I think the reality is that local prejudices and local values play a big role in the jury system.
And so Vinny has to kind of counter that. And as you said, it turns out he gets the jury to like him. He sort of operates on their terrain, shows his understanding of Southern culture with the grits, how long it takes to cook grits. Something, as you said, he picks up just like the morning before. So yes, it's important, I guess, one, to be aware of those issues, and two, to rely on local counsel when you're trying a case in a different part of the country, or as different as Alabama is from New York, was then and still is today. The film was released in 1992, a time when public support for the death penalty was very high in the United States. In New York, Governor George Pataki would reinstate the death penalty only a few years later in 1995. No one's going to confuse My Cousin Vinny with great film dramas about wrongful convictions, but as a widely popular film, might it have some larger social value or impact beyond its comedic trappings?
So I think the answer to that is yes. I should reflect my own biases here. In 2002, I declared the federal death penalty unconstitutional. I got reversed about a nanosecond later, but I still think I was right. And I think the broader message here is how there can be wrongful convictions. There was a time when most judges didn't even believe that there could be wrongful convictions. Learned Hand back in 1923 in one of his written opinions said, it's a myth. Innocent people are never convicted. Well, we now know through the Innocence Project and other organizations that hundreds of people have been wrongfully convicted, and many of them in death penalty or very similarly serious murder and rape cases. And fortunately, in those hundreds of cases where, mostly thanks to DNA, the truth has finally come out, the people have been released from prison. But God knows how many innocent people did go to the death chamber because DNA did not exist at the time they were convicted. So I think there is a serious undertone here. There's also, as I mentioned earlier, the undertone of the inaccuracy of eyewitness identification. The Innocence Project, which I mentioned just a moment ago, says that out of the several hundred people that it has exonerated of murder and rape, faulty eyewitness identification was present in 70% of those cases. And it's very powerful evidence because, as I mentioned, typically the eyewitness has no motive to lie. So their testimony can't be impeached with ease. And yet, as this very film demonstrates, it can still be wrongful identification. So I do think the film has a message that doesn't wear it on its sleeve, and that's a good thing too, but it's there.
Yeah, it's all the witnesses, all the prosecution witnesses, if I'm recalling correctly, that Vinny ends up undercutting on cross-examination were all eyewitness.
Yes, exactly. There were 3 altogether. We saw 2 of them, and there was a third one as well. But the common theme was, how could these boys not be guilty when 3 people saw them at the scene of the crime or fleeing from the scene of the crime? The National Academy of Science has done a report on this that I was fortunate enough to be involved in. And there are many, many reasons why eyewitness testimony can be wrong. I'll just mention one, which is the racial effect. That wasn't present here, but white people are much less good at discerning the fine facial features of Black people. Black people are much less good than white people in discerning the fine facial features of white people. That's been well established, but juries aren't usually told about that. And it can be a major cause of mistaken identification.
Yeah, and the importance of cross-examination and in bringing this out. It's just a few questions, and then he's able to undercut it. We heard the 2 clips, one involving the cooking of the grits, the other the glasses, the woman who wore the glasses, and the third is another mistaken eyewitness identification, someone who's looking through what's basically a muddy a window that's discolored and through multiple branches and just is not accurately seeing what's there. So, the film really is very important on eyewitness testimony as well as what it has to say regarding capital punishment. But the eyewitness testimony, I think, is really front and center in the film. In your book, Why the Innocent Plead Guilty and the Guilty Go Free, you powerfully describe how the criminal justice system places pressure on individuals, including those who are innocent, to forgo their constitutional right to a jury trial and to plead guilty. A plea, of course, was never on the table in My Cousin Vinny, nor could it have been, since you'd have no film, no drama, no comedy. But in that sense, do movies like My Cousin Vinny and other great courtroom dramas paint a somewhat distorted picture of how the American criminal justice system operates in practice today?
Yes, and this has been a very serious problem with our criminal justice system over the last 30 years or so. It used to be that somewhere between 20 and 25% of all people accused of felonies would go to trial, and sometimes they would win, sometimes they would lose, but in either case, the public knew what the evidence was. The system got tested by cross-examination. It really had a great effect on keeping our system of justice honest. In the last quarter of the 20th century, because of rising crime rates during that period, both Congress and the state legislatures passed much more punitive criminal laws. The penalties became mandatory in many cases. There were introduced sentencing guidelines that greatly increased the likely sentence. And the result was that the stakes of going to trial were much, much greater. And so the best thing a defense lawyer could do was plea bargain to get a lesser count with a lesser penalty. And the result was that by the year 2000, and to this very day since, 97% of all criminal cases, state and federal in the United States, are settled by plea bargains, as opposed to most 75 or so percent previously. And that has had, in my view, a devastating effect on the criminal justice system. It's now a secret system. It is a system of negotiations in the privacy of the prosecutor's office. And then you go before a judge who knows nothing about the case, so he takes the plea without any problem in a matter of minutes. It also leads, as I mentioned before, to innocent people being convicted. It's interesting that of the people exonerated by the Innocence Project, 10% of those pled guilty to either murder or rape in order to escape the death penalty. And they were totally innocent. They didn't commit the crime at all. I find it shocking, to be frank.
Yeah, it's a great point, and you so brilliantly exposed that in your book. It's a hard subject to capture on film. There's still this ethos of the courtroom drama and the idea of the ability of the system to test the case, test the prosecution's case, which it can do, but the pressures and the incentives, as you say, are there and they're overwhelming. And as a result, not infrequently, innocent people will plead guilty to escape off harsher punishment. The film also touches a little bit on the subject of legal education. You've taught at multiple law schools, so I think this might be of interest to you. And it features an illuminating exchange between Vinny and Mona Lisa on how Vinny intends to try the case without any experience. So Mona Lisa says, "Learn as you go. You didn't learn that in law school." And he says, "Nah, they teach you precedents, interpretations. You're supposed to learn procedure from the firm that hires you, or you can go to court and watch." She responds, "Well, have you been doing that?" Of course not. But there's the kernel of truth there, in that a lot of what Vinny does in the film is not taught in law school in terms of the courtroom, the cross-examination, and other aspects of trial.
Law schools have tried to adjust this by having more and more so-called clinical programs. When I went to law school, those were virtually non-existent. Now they're part of most law schools' curriculum. But in fairness, it's really hard to learn how to be a good trial lawyer without being there and doing it. It's another problem that the decline of trials poses for trial lawyers. I now see in my courtroom attorneys trying their second or third jury trial, even though they've been in practice for 5 years. And that's because there's so few trials. And of course, therefore, they make mistakes that they wouldn't have made if they had had 10 trials. but it is something that you learn by doing. Now, in fairness, there's a question of natural talent or instinct. Vinny clearly has natural talent. His cousin, in telling the co-defendant why he's asked for Vinny, says, we used to have amateur magicians, and Vinny would always know exactly how they were pulling off their tricks. So Vinny is a guy with natural talent. And of course, if you have natural talent, you don't need much more in the way of book learning. But for the rest of us, it is a problem. But I do think there's only so much law schools can teach in this regard. You have to be there. You have to get the experience on the ground.
Yeah, and it shows how important it is for someone who's quick on their feet, especially a case like this, eyewitness testimony. It's not a heavy document case. It's not a case that's going to require a lot of research. But Vinny, who he says, like, no one's ever pulled the wool over the eyes of a Gambini, right? Is someone can detect when someone is not telling the truth. And that seems to be his innate skill.
I should mention, though, it has nothing directly to do with your question, but that never stops me, that the greatest of all Supreme Court justices, John Marshall, Chief Justice at the very outset of the Supreme Court, who most of our Supreme Court precedents really originated with him, decided as a young man to go to William and Mary College. In those days, there wasn't separate law schools. You went to a university and took their law course. And he went for 6 weeks and he couldn't stand it. And he dropped out after 6 weeks and went on to become the greatest Supreme Court justice. So much for law schools. Now I say that with great apologies, because not only you, John, but my own brother is a law professor. But, instinct and learning can be achieved in many ways.
When I get ready to teach Marbury versus Madison again in a few weeks.
You'll mention that, right?
Well, there's a storied history celebrating defense lawyers in American cinema, right? Gregory Peck as Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, Spencer Tracy in Inherit the Wind, where he was portraying, in effect, Clarence Darrow, the great American defense attorney, and Jimmy Stewart in Anatomy of a Murder. Where do you situate Vinny Gambini and Joe Pesci's performance as Vincent Gambini in this canon?
Well, it's apples and oranges. Those other films involve very serious lawyers involved in very serious matters. Now, this is nominally a very serious matter, a murder trial, but really it's a comedy. And it's one thing to be able to identify with, for example, Spencer Tracy in Inherit the Wind, when he is engaged in the serious business of exposing total prejudice and irrationality, and he does so in such magnificent form. That's not what Joe Pesci is being asked to do here. What Joe Pesci is being asked to do is show what a really brilliant lawyer and brilliant student of human behavior and psychology can achieve in a comedic situation. And so, though I think they're very different, I think Pesci's performance was fantastic, very different from characters he's played in other films. And so that was another aspect. I do think My Cousin Vinny is better even than those films you mentioned in its adherence to the real rules of law and evidence and procedure. It's the real thing in that sense, done against a comic background, because you got to sell the film. Come on. But I really think it's, how do you compare Aeschylus to Aristophanes? It's two different genres, but within those limits, I think this is a fantastic film.
Yeah, it's fantastic and it's very funny, and they take a lot of liberties with other aspects of the legal profession, but the courtroom scenes, as you say, are really true to life. They haven't happened, they could have happened. And even more amazing in that the director, although he had legal training at Cambridge, did not, as far as I'm aware, actually practice law. So really did a good job to get it right and in terms of how a trial works.
Yes, and he also got it right about Brooklyn accents and Alabama accents and a whole bunch of other things that probably were not natural to him. So he is the unsung hero of the film.
Anything else you want to add about the film?
I'm thinking that since you and I both wear glasses, we'll never be able to be witnesses again in any criminal case.
Exactly. Well, Judge Rakoff, let me thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been an honor and a pleasure to talk about this classic American comedy with you and the American legal system as well. So thank you.
My pleasure and my honor. Thank you.